Captain Marcus stood at his post outside the grand palace gates, his polished boots reflecting the morning sun. 20 years of faithful service had taught him to notice everything, every shadow that moved differently, every sound that didn't belong. The royal family trusted him completely, and he wore that trust like armor. The palace grounds buzzed with their usual activity. Gardeners tended to the rose bushes, servants hurried between buildings carrying silver trays, and other guards maintained their positions along the walls. Marcus had seen thousands of mornings like this, each one blending into the next with comfortable predictability. Then he heard it, so soft he almost missed it entirely. A small voice barely above a whisper calling from somewhere beyond the gates. "Please, someone help me." Marcus turned his head slightly, trying to locate the source without abandoning his formal stance. The voice came again, weaker this time, filled with exhaustion and fear. "Is anyone there? Please." He scanned the area beyond the ornate iron gates. The cobblestone street appeared empty except for a few merchants setting up their morning stalls in the distance. But there, tucked between two large stone pillars that supported the gate's decorative arch, he spotted a small figure huddled in the shadows. A young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old, sat curled against the cold stone. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her dark hair tangled and matted. She clutched something small against her chest, a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. When she looked up and met Marcus's eyes through the gate bars, he saw terror mixed with the faintest glimmer of hope. Marcus had strict orders. Under no circumstances was he to leave his post during the morning shift. The royal family would be moving through the palace grounds soon, and his position was critical for their security. But something about the child's desperate expression made his chest tighten with concern. "Little one," he called softly, "what are you doing here?" The girl's eyes widened. She struggled to her feet, swaying slightly as if she hadn't eaten in days. "My mama told me to run," she whispered, moving closer to the gate. "Bad men came to our house. They hurt Papa. Mama said to find the palace, said the guards would help." Marcus felt his training wore with his humanity. Every instinct told him to maintain his position, follow protocol, wait for the proper authorities to handle the situation. But the child's story sent ice through his veins. If what she said was true, she was in immediate danger. "Where is your mama now?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle while his eyes scanned for any sign of the threats she mentioned. Tears began streaming down the girl's dirt-stained cheeks. "She didn't come with me. She pushed me out the back window and told me to run fast. I ran all night. I'm so scared." Marcus looked back toward the palace. His replacement wouldn't arrive for another 4 hours. The royal family's morning walk wouldn't begin for at least an hour. But protocols existed for good reasons, developed over centuries to protect the kingdom's most important residents. The girl swayed again, catching herself against the gate. Her lips looked pale, almost blue in the morning light. Whatever had happened to her family, she was clearly in physical distress as well as emotional trauma. "What's your name, brave girl?" Marcus asked. "Elena," she replied, her voice barely audible. "Elena Martinelli. My papa worked at the grain mill near the river. Mama makes bread, made bread." Her confusion about verb tense revealed how shocked and disoriented she was. Marcus knew the area she described. It was a working-class neighborhood about 5 miles from the palace, where honest families lived simple lives. If criminals had targeted that area, Elena might not be the only child in danger. He studied her more carefully. Her clothes, though dirty and torn, had been well made. The stitching on her small dress showed careful craftsmanship, suggesting her family, while not wealthy, took pride in their appearance. The stuffed rabbit she clutched showed signs of being carefully mended multiple times, evidence of a loving home where even toys were treasured and preserved. "Elena, I'm Captain Marcus. I've been guarding this palace for many years." He spoke in the same tone he used with his own nieces, warm but strong. "Can you tell me more about these bad men?" "What did they look like?" The girl's whole body began trembling. 3 of them, big men with dark clothes. They had knives and they were asking Papa about money. Papa kept saying he didn't have any money, that we were just mill workers. But they didn't believe him. Marcus's military experience helped him read between the lines. This sounded like a robbery gone wrong, possibly part of a larger criminal operation targeting working families. Elena's father probably resisted or couldn't provide what the criminals wanted, leading to violence. "How long did you run, Elena?" Do you remember the path you took? She pointed with a shaking finger toward the main road. I stayed in the shadows like Mama taught me. Hid behind buildings when I heard voices. The sun wasn't up yet when I started running. I got lost twice, but I kept asking people where the palace was. The fact that she had navigated 5 miles through the city in darkness, while terrified and probably injured, spoke to remarkable courage for such a young child. It also meant that whatever had happened at her home had occurred in the middle of the night, hours ago. Marcus made his decision. 20 years of faithful service had earned him some trust from his superiors. More importantly, his oath wasn't just to protect the royal family but to serve the kingdom and its people. This child was one of those people and she needed help immediately. Elena, I'm going to help you, but I need you to be very brave for just a little longer. He began unlocking the smaller pedestrian gate beside the main entrance. We're going to go somewhere safe and then we're going to make sure your mama and papa get the help they need. The girl's eyes filled with relief so profound it was almost painful to witness. You'll really help me? You're not going to send me away? I promise you, Elena Martinelli, I will not send you away. A good soldier protects those who cannot protect themselves. Marcus stepped through the gate, officially abandoning his post for the first time in 2 decades. Now let's get you somewhere warm and safe. Marcus gently took Elena's small hand in his gloved one, feeling how cold her fingers were despite the warming morning air. She stumbled slightly as they walked, her legs weak from exhaustion and fear. Without hesitation, he scooped her up in his arms, her slight weight a reminder of how young and vulnerable she was. Where are we going? Elena asked, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter as they moved away from the palace gates. Somewhere safe where we can get you food and warmth, Marcus replied. He couldn't take her into the palace itself. That would create complications he wasn't prepared to handle. But he knew every building, every ally, every safe haven in the surrounding area. As they walked, Marcus's mind raced through the implications of his decision. By leaving his post, he had violated direct orders and centuries of protocol. His commanding officer, Colonel Santos, would be furious. The royal family's security had been compromised, even if only slightly. His career, his pension, everything he had worked for could be destroyed. But looking down at Elena's trusting face, he felt certain he had made the right choice. Some things mattered more than rules and regulations. Captain Marcus, Elena whispered, are you in trouble because of me? The question surprised him. Even in her traumatized state, she was perceptive enough to understand that his actions might have consequences. Don't worry about that, little one. Adults sometimes have to make difficult choices. I chose to help you, and I'm not sorry. They reached a small inn 3 blocks from the palace, a place Marcus knew well. The innkeeper, Mrs. Chen, had served meals to off-duty guards for years. She was trustworthy, discreet, and had a soft heart for children. The morning crowd hadn't arrived yet, so the inn's main room was nearly empty. Mrs. Chen looked up from wiping down tables, her eyes widening when she saw Marcus in full uniform carrying a small, disheveled girl. Captain Marcus? What's wrong? Is the child hurt? She needs help, Mrs. Chen. Food, warmth, and a safe place to rest while I handle some urgent business. Marcus set Elena down gently in a chair near the fireplace. This is Elena. She's been through something terrible. Mrs. Chen immediately switched into motherly mode, bustling around to fetch warm milk, fresh bread, and a soft blanket. She had raised 5 children of her own and recognized trauma when she saw it. Poor little dove, she murmured, wrapping the blanket around Elena's shoulders. When did you last eat, sweetheart? Elena had to think about it, her exhaustion making memory difficult. Yesterday morning, I think. Mama made porridge with honey. Marcus watched Mrs. Chen's face soften with concern. The innkeeper placed a bowl of warm soup in front of Elena, along with fresh bread and butter. Eat slowly, dear one. Your stomach needs to adjust. While Elena began eating with obvious hunger but careful restraint, Marcus stepped aside with Mrs. Chen. I need you to watch her for a few hours. She's witnessed something terrible, possibly violence against her family. I have to investigate and make some reports. Of course, Captain. But what about your duties at the palace? Marcus looked back at Elena, who was methodically eating her soup while staring into the fire. Some duties are more important than others. This child needs protection and I'm the only one who heard her call for help. Mrs. Chen studied his face carefully. This is going to cause problems for you, isn't it? Probably. But I've never regretted doing the right thing, and I won't start now. As if summoned by his words, Marcus heard the distinctive sound of military boots on cobblestone outside. Through the inn's window, he saw Colonel Santos approaching with 2 other guards. Someone had already discovered his absence and sent the colonel to find him. "Elena," Marcus called softly, "some other soldiers are coming to talk with me. They might seem stern, but they're good men. Stay close to Mrs. Chen and remember that you're safe now." Elena's eyes widened with fear. "Are they going to take me away? Are they angry because you helped me?" "No one is taking you anywhere until we make sure you're completely safe," Marcus promised. "And if they're angry with me, that's my responsibility to handle." Colonel Santos entered the inn with the controlled fury of a career military man whose carefully organized world had been disrupted. His weathered face was set in hard lines, and his gray eyes immediately fixed on Marcus with disapproval. "Captain Marcus," he said in a voice that could cut glass, "perhaps you'd like to explain why your post has been abandoned and why you're in civilian establishments when you should be protecting the royal family." Marcus stood at attention automatically, but his voice remained steady. "Sir, I encountered a citizen in immediate distress, a child whose family appears to have been attacked by criminals. She requested aid, and I determined that her safety took priority over routine duties." "Routine duties?" Colonel Santos's voice rose slightly. "You consider protecting the Crown Prince routine? The royal family could have been attacked while you were playing nursemaid to some street child." Elena flinched at the harsh words, and Mrs. Chen instinctively moved closer to shield her. Marcus felt anger flash through him at the colonel's dismissive tone, but he maintained his military bearing. "Sir, with respect, the royal family was safely within the palace walls with multiple layers of security. This child was alone, terrified and potentially in continued danger from the criminals who attacked her family. I made a tactical decision based on immediate threat assessment." Colonel Santos stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You made a decision to violate direct orders, abandon your post, and prioritize a civilian over your sworn duty to the crown. Do you understand what this means for your career, Captain?" "I understand the potential consequences, sir. But I also understand my oath to serve and protect the people of this kingdom. This child is one of those people." Elena suddenly stood up from her chair, her small voice carrying surprising strength. "Please don't be angry with Captain Marcus. He saved me. Bad men hurt my papa and my mama told me to run. I was so scared, and Captain Marcus was the only one who helped me." Colonel Santos looked down at Elena, his harsh expression softening slightly as he took in her appearance. The torn clothes, the exhaustion, the stuffed rabbit clutched in her arms. For the first time, he seemed to truly see her as a person, rather than just a disruption to military protocol. "Child," he said more gently, "what exactly happened to your family?" As Elena began recounting her story again, Marcus watched his commanding officer's face change. The colonel had served in combat, had seen the results of violence against innocents. Despite his rigid adherence to rules, he was fundamentally a good man who had sworn the same oaths as Marcus. When Elena finished speaking, Colonel Santos was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he turned back to Marcus. "Captain, your actions were still a violation of protocol, but—" He paused, struggling with the conflict between regulations and humanity. "But perhaps we need to investigate this situation more thoroughly before determining appropriate consequences." Marcus felt a small surge of hope. "Sir, I believe Elena's family may not be the only victims. This could be part of a larger criminal operation that threatens other citizens. Then we'll need to coordinate with city authorities immediately." Colonel Santos straightened, shifting from disciplinarian to strategic commander. "Mrs. Chen, can this child remain in your care while we investigate?" "Absolutely, Colonel. She'll be safe and well fed." Elena looked between the adults, her young mind trying to process the rapid changes in tone and direction. "Does this mean you're going to help my mama and papa?" Colonel Santos knelt down to Elena's eye level, his stern facade completely gone now. "Yes, little one. We're going to help your family and make sure the bad men can't hurt anyone else. Captain Marcus did the right thing by listening to you." Marcus felt relief flood through him, though he knew this situation was far from resolved. They still had to investigate Elena's claims, potentially rescue her parents, and deal with what sounded like organized criminal activity. But for now, Elena was safe, and his superiors understood why he had made the choice he did. Sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules, even when the consequences were uncertain. Within an hour, the inn had transformed into an impromptu command center. Colonel Santos had summoned additional guards, and city constables had arrived to coordinate the investigation. Maps of the mill district were spread across Mrs. Chen's largest table, while Elena sat nearby, providing crucial details about her neighborhood and the events of the previous night. Detective Rodriguez, a seasoned investigator with the City Watch, crouched beside Elena's chair. His gentle manner with children came from years of working difficult cases, and he understood how to extract information without causing additional trauma. "Elena, you've been very brave and helpful," he said warmly. "I need to ask you some more questions about the men who came to your house. Can you remember anything special about them? How they talked, what they wore, anything that made them different?" Elena clutched her stuffed rabbit and thought carefully. "One of them had a scar right here," she said, tracing a line down her left cheek. And he talked funny, like the words were hard for him to say. The biggest one had a silver chain around his neck with something shiny hanging from it. Detective Rodriguez exchanged glances with Colonel Santos. These details suggested the criminals weren't random street thugs, but possibly part of an organized group with distinctive characteristics that could help identify them. "What about their voices, sweetheart? Did they sound like they came from around here or somewhere else?" "Different," Elena said immediately. "Like people from the mountains. My uncle lives in the mountains and he talks like that, all slow and deep." Marcus, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. "Detective, that could narrow our search significantly. Mountain accents are distinctive in this region. If we're dealing with an organized criminal group from the hill country, they might have targeted the Mill District specifically." "Why the Mill District?" Colonel Santos asked. "It's isolated enough to avoid immediate attention, but close enough to major trade routes for quick escape," Marcus explained. "Plus, mill families often handle cash from grain sales, making them attractive targets for criminals who don't understand that most transactions are actually done through trade agreements." Detective Rodriguez nodded approvingly. "Good analysis, Captain. Elena, did these men seem to know your father's work schedule? Did they know when he would be home?" Elena's face scrunched in concentration. "They knew Papa worked at the mill. They kept asking about money from the grain sales. But Papa doesn't keep money at home. He always takes it to the bank in town the next day. I heard him tell Mama that lots of times. So they were after money that wasn't there," Mrs. Chen observed from behind the counter, where she was preparing more food for the assembled officials. That must have made them angry when they couldn't find what they expected. The implication hung heavy in the air. Frustrated criminals often became violent criminals, especially when they believed their victims were lying or hiding something. Detective Rodriguez stood and walked to the map table. "Elena, can you show us exactly where your house is and which way you ran to get here?" Elena slipped off her chair and approached the map hesitantly. The detailed drawings of streets and buildings looked confusing compared to the simple neighborhood she knew. Marcus knelt beside her, pointing out landmarks. "There's the river, Elena, and there's the main mill building. Can you find your house from those?" Elena's face lit up with recognition. "There, right there by the little bridge." She pointed to a cluster of small houses near a bend in the river. "And I ran this way." She traced a winding path with her finger. "Staying away from the big streets like Mama taught me." "Smart girl," Detective Rodriguez murmured, making notes. That route would have kept her hidden from anyone who might have been watching or following. Colonel Santos studied the map more closely. If the criminals were from the mountain region, they would have likely approached from the North Road. That means they might still be in the area, especially if they're planning additional attacks. Or they might have Elena's parents with them. Detective Rodriguez added grimly, "We need to move quickly but carefully." Marcus felt his chest tighten with worry. Every minute that passed decreased the chances of finding Elena's parents alive and unharmed. But rushing in without proper planning could make the situation worse. "Detective, I know that area well," Marcus offered. "I grew up not far from the mill district before joining the Royal Guard. I could guide a small team through the back paths without being detected." Colonel Santos looked skeptical. "Captain, you've already violated protocol once today. I can't authorize you to participate in a potentially dangerous civilian rescue operation." "With respect, sir, I'm the one Elena trusts. If we find her parents, especially if they're injured or traumatized, having a familiar face might be crucial for cooperation and medical treatment." Elena looked up at the adults surrounding her. sensing the tension in their voices even if she didn't understand all the implications. Are you going to find Mama and Papa? Are they hurt? Detective Rodriguez knelt beside her again. We're going to do everything we can to find them and bring them to safety, Elena. But it might take some time and we need you to be patient and brave while we work. Can Captain Marcus come find them? He promised he would help. The simple trust in her voice made Marcus's throat tight with emotion. This child had placed her faith in him completely, and he couldn't bear the thought of disappointing her. Colonel Santos watched the interaction between Marcus and Elena, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he sighed. Captain, against my better judgment, I'm going to allow you to accompany the rescue team as a civilian consultant. But you'll follow Detective Rodriguez's lead completely. This is a city watch operation, not a military action. Understood, sir. Thank you. Detective Rodriguez began organizing the rescue operation. We'll need a small team. Too many people will attract attention and potentially spook the criminals into doing something desperate. Captain Marcus, myself, and 2 experienced constables should be sufficient for initial reconnaissance. What about backup? Colonel Santos asked. Additional units will be staged at key points around the Mill District, ready to respond if we encounter more resistance than expected. But the primary goal is to locate and extract Elena's parents safely, not to engage in combat. Marcus strapped on his sword and adjusted his armor, preparing for a mission very different from his usual palace duty. As he checked his equipment, he felt Elena's small hand tug at his cloak. Captain Marcus, will you bring Mama and Papa back here? To Mrs. Chen's inn? Marcus knelt down to her eye level, choosing his words carefully. Elena, I promise I will do everything in my power to bring your parents back safely. But sometimes rescues are complicated, and they might need to go to other safe places first, maybe to see a doctor, or to talk with other people who can help catch the bad men. Elena nodded solemnly. But you'll come back and tell me what happened? You won't leave without saying goodbye? I will absolutely come back and tell you everything, little one. That's a promise. Mrs. Chen wrapped her arm around Elena's shoulders. And while Captain Marcus is helping your parents, you and I are going to keep each other company. Maybe we can bake some cookies to welcome them home. As the rescue team prepared to leave, Marcus caught Colonel Santos's eye. His commanding officer's expression was complex. Disapproval mixed with understanding, worry tempered by respect. Captain, Colonel Santos said quietly, bring those people home safely. And bring yourself home safely too. Elena isn't the only one counting on you. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. In the span of a few hours, his simple duty as a palace guard had expanded into something much larger and more complex. But looking back at Elena, who was watching him with complete faith in her young eyes, he knew he wouldn't trade this mission for 100 routine days at the palace gates. The real work was just beginning. The afternoon sun cast long shadows as Marcus led the small rescue team through the winding paths toward the Mill District. Detective Rodriguez walked beside him, while 2 experienced constables followed at a careful distance. They had changed into civilian clothes to avoid attracting attention, though Marcus felt strange without his familiar Royal Guard uniform. As they approached Elena's neighborhood, the signs of recent trouble became evident. Several houses showed damage. Broken windows, doors hanging off their hinges, scattered belongings in the yards. This hadn't been a single targeted attack, but rather a systematic assault on multiple families. This is worse than we thought, Detective Rodriguez murmured, documenting the damage with his notebook. These criminals weren't just after Elena's family. They've hit at least 6 houses on this street. Marcus felt his anger growing with each damaged home they passed. These were good, hard-working families who had done nothing to deserve such violence. Children like Elena lived in these houses, and some of them might not have been as lucky as she was. Detective, should we check these other houses for survivors? The backup teams are handling that. Our priority is Elena's family, but you're right to be concerned. We're going to need a much larger investigation when this is over. They reached the small bridge Elena had mentioned, and Marcus immediately spotted her house. It was a modest but well-maintained home with a small garden where vegetables grew in neat rows. The front door stood wide open and broken pottery littered the front steps. Detective Rodriguez signaled for everyone to stop while he assessed the scene. No signs of current occupation, but we need to be careful. Captain, can you tell us the layout of the house from Elena's descriptions? Marcus closed his eyes, recalling everything Elena had told them. Kitchen in the back where her mother made bread. Parents' bedroom upstairs in the front. Elena's room was small in the back upstairs with a window facing the garden. That's probably where her mother helped her escape. Good. We'll approach from the back garden. Check for any signs that the parents might still be inside or nearby. They moved carefully around the house, staying low and quiet. The back garden showed signs of a struggle. Trampled vegetables, overturned buckets, a child's small shoes abandoned near a broken trellis. But most importantly, there were clear signs that people had been dragged from the house toward the nearby woods. Boot prints, Detective Rodriguez observed, pointing to the disturbed earth. At least 4 different sets and 2 sets that looked like they might belong to people who weren't walking willingly. Marcus studied the tracks, his military training helping him read the story they told. The parents were taken alive but probably not cooperating. The criminals went northwest toward the old logging roads. That makes sense, one of the constables added. Those roads lead to abandoned mining camps in the hills. Perfect place to hold captives if you're planning to demand ransom or use them for leverage. Detective Rodriguez made the decision quickly. We follow the trail, but carefully. If Elena's parents are being held captive, we can't risk spooking their captors into doing something drastic. The trail through the woods was relatively easy to follow at first. The criminals had been more concerned with speed than stealth, leaving broken branches and clear footprints in the soft forest floor. But as they climbed higher into the hills, the tracks became more difficult to distinguish. After an hour of careful tracking, they heard voices ahead. Rough, angry voices that didn't sound like they belonged to local people. Marcus held up his hand, signaling everyone to stop and listen. Told you we should have just taken the money and left, one voice was saying. Now we've got to deal with these people, and that kid might have brought the law down on us. The kid won't be a problem much longer, another voice replied coldly. And these mill workers are going to tell us where they really keep their money, or they're going to regret it. Marcus felt ice in his veins. Elena's parents were definitely still alive, but they were in immediate danger. He caught Detective Rodriguez's eye and saw the same grim determination reflected there. Moving with practiced stealth, the team crept closer to the source of the voices. Through the trees, they could see an old mining camp. A few ramshackle buildings clustered around what had once been the entrance to a played-out silver mine. 3 men sat around a small fire, and Marcus immediately recognized them from Elena's description. The one with the scar was cleaning his fingernails with a large knife, while the biggest man, the one with the silver chain Elena had mentioned, paced back and forth with obvious agitation. "Where are the parents?" Detective Rodriguez whispered. Marcus pointed to the largest building where a faint light flickered in one of the windows. "There, I think. That was probably the mine supervisor's office." They spent several minutes observing the camp, counting their opponents and assessing the situation. The 3 criminals were armed but seemed more focused on arguing among themselves than maintaining proper security. Their overconfidence might work in the rescue team's favor. Detective Rodriguez sketched a quick plan in the dirt. Constable's approach from the east created distraction. Captain Marcus and I circle around to the office building and extract the hostages. "Everyone clear?" Marcus nodded, but privately he was concerned about the coordination required. Unlike military operations he was used to, this rescue depended on timing and civilian law enforcement procedures he wasn't familiar with. "Detective, what if the criminals don't surrender? What if they threaten the hostages? Then we adapt and improvise. But our primary goal is getting Elena's parents out alive. Everything else is secondary." The constables moved into position, and Marcus followed Detective Rodriguez around the perimeter of the camp. Up close, the mining buildings looked even more decrepit and dangerous. Some of the roof beams had rotted through, and the floors creaked ominously with each step. Through a grimy window, Marcus could see into the old supervisor's office. Elena's parents were there, tied to chairs but clearly alive. Her father showed signs of being beaten. His face was bruised and his shirt torn. Her mother appeared physically unharmed but was obviously terrified. "How do we get to them without alerting the guards?" Marcus whispered. Detective Rodriguez studied the building's structure. "There's a back door, but it's probably locked or blocked. We might have to go through that window." Before they could decide on their approach, shouting erupted from the main camp. One of the constables had apparently been spotted, and the criminals were reacting with panic rather than organization. "Now," Detective Rodriguez hissed.
"Well, they're distracted."
Marcus didn't hesitate. He smashed through the window with the pommel of his sword, landing inside the office in a shower of glass. Elena's parents looked up at him with shock and relief. "I'm Captain Marcus," he said quickly while cutting their bonds. "Elena is safe. We're here to take you home." Elena's mother began crying with relief. "Elena, our little girl is really safe?" "Safe and worried about you both," Marcus confirmed. "But we need to move quickly." Detective Rodriguez climbed through the window behind him, and together they helped Elena's parents to their feet. Her father was weaker than he appeared, probably suffering from internal injuries as well as the obvious external ones. "Can you walk, sir?" Detective Rodriguez asked. "I'll walk to the gates of hell if it means getting back to my daughter," Elena's father replied with determination that reminded Marcus strongly of Elena herself. The sounds of confrontation were growing louder outside, which meant their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. They needed to get Elena's parents to safety before the situation escalated into something they couldn't control. "This way," Marcus said, supporting Elena's father while Detective Rodriguez helped her mother. "Stay low, stay quiet, and trust us." As they prepared to escape through the back of the building, Marcus silently prayed that Elena's faith in him hadn't been misplaced. The hardest part of any rescue was getting everyone home safely, and they weren't there yet. The escape from the mining camp proved more challenging than Marcus had anticipated. Elena's father, despite his brave words, was struggling with each step. His breathing was labored, and Marcus suspected he had broken ribs in addition to the visible bruises and cuts. "We need to rest," Detective Rodriguez whispered, as they reached a cluster of large rocks about halfway down the hillside. The sounds of shouting and conflict were fading behind them, which suggested the constables had either captured the criminals or driven them away from the immediate area. Elena's mother, whose name Marcus had learned was Maria, knelt beside her husband Giuseppe with obvious concern. "Giuseppe, how badly are you hurt? Tell me the truth." "I'll live to see our Elena again," Giuseppe replied, though his pale complexion suggested he was in more pain than he wanted to admit. "They wanted to know where we kept the mill's money. Maria. They couldn't understand that we don't keep it at home." Marcus helped Giuseppe lean against one of the rocks while Detective Rodriguez used his whistle to signal their backup teams. Within minutes, they heard responding whistles from multiple directions. Help was on the way. "Maria, Giuseppe," Marcus said gently, "I want you to know how brave your daughter was. When she found me at the palace gates, she was frightened but determined. She walked 5 miles through the city at night to find help for you both." Maria began crying again, but these were tears of pride mixed with relief. "She's always been our brave little bird. Even as a baby, she was fearless about everything." "Where is she now?" Giuseppe asked, his voice stronger when talking about his daughter. "Is she really safe?" "She's at Mrs. Chen's inn being well fed and cared for. She's worried about you both, but she's warm and protected." Marcus smiled, remembering Elena's determination. "She made me promise to bring you back to her." Detective Rodriguez had moved a short distance away to coordinate with the approaching backup teams, and Marcus could hear him giving updates about the rescue's success and the need for medical assistance. "Captain Marcus," Maria said suddenly, "why did you help Elena? She told me once about seeing the palace guards, how official and important they looked. You could have ignored a dirty little girl calling for help." Marcus considered the question seriously. "Maria, 20 years ago when I first joined the Royal Guard, I took an oath to serve and protect the kingdom and its people. For most of those years, I thought that meant standing at gates and following protocols. But today I learned that sometimes serving the kingdom means helping one frightened child who needs someone to listen." Giuseppe reached out with a trembling hand to clasp Marcus's arm. "You saved our family. We will never forget this debt." "There's no debt," Marcus replied firmly. "What happened to you was wrong, and helping stop that wrong was simply the right thing to do." The sound of approaching footsteps announced the arrival of the backup team, along with a medic carrying supplies. Detective Rodriguez returned with updates about the situation at the mining camp. "All 3 criminals are in custody," he reported with satisfaction. "The constables managed to surround them when they panicked. Turns out they've been hitting families throughout the region for weeks, always looking for money that wasn't there." The medic began examining Giuseppe while asking questions about his injuries. "Sir, I think you have some broken ribs and possibly internal bruising. We need to get you to the city physician immediately." "Not until I see Elena," Giuseppe said stubbornly. I need to hold my daughter and tell her everything is going to be fine. Giuseppe, Maria said gently. Elena will understand if you need medical care first. She's a smart girl. But Marcus understood the father's need. After hours of captivity, not knowing if they would ever see their daughter again, Giuseppe needed that reunion to truly believe they were safe. What if we brought Elena to meet us partway? Marcus suggested. Mrs. Chen's Inn has a cart. Elena could ride to meet you, and then you could go directly to the physician afterward. Detective Rodriguez considered this. That could work. The main road between here and the city is secure now that we have the criminals in custody. Within an hour, they had arranged the meeting. Mrs. Chen drove her small cart with Elena bouncing excitedly beside her, while Marcus and the medic accompanied Giuseppe and Maria in a larger wagon that could transport an injured man more comfortably. When the two vehicles met on the road, Elena's reaction was everything Marcus had hoped for. She leaped from Mrs. Chen's cart and ran to her parents with tears streaming down her face, but these were tears of joy and relief. "Mama! Papa!" she cried, throwing herself into their arms. "I was so scared. But Captain Marcus promised he would bring you back, and he did." Giuseppe hugged his daughter despite the pain in his ribs, his own tears flowing freely. "My brave little bird, you saved us all by being so courageous." Maria held them both, creating a tight family circle that seemed to shut out the rest of the world for a few precious moments. Marcus watched from a respectful distance, feeling something he hadn't experienced in his 20 years of service. The deep satisfaction of knowing that his actions had directly preserved something precious and irreplaceable. "Captain Marcus," Elena called to him. "Come here. I want Mama and Papa to properly thank you." Marcus approached the family, feeling somewhat awkward about accepting thanks for what seemed like basic human decency. But Giuseppe struggled to his feet despite his injuries, Maria beside him supporting his weight. "Captain," Giuseppe said formally, "you risked your career, your future, and your safety for our family. How can we ever repay such a debt?" "You already have," Marcus replied. "You raised a daughter brave enough to ask for help when her family needed it, and trusting enough to believe that help would come. Elena's courage is your gift to the kingdom." Detective Rodriguez stepped forward with practical matters. "We'll need detailed statements from all of you about the attack and the criminals involved. But that can wait until after Giuseppe receives medical attention." "Will the bad men go to prison?" Elena asked, still clinging to her parents. "Yes, little one," Detective Rodriguez assured her. "They'll go to prison for a very long time, and they won't be able to hurt any other families." As they prepared to continue toward the city, Elena ran back to Marcus one more time. "Captain Marcus, will you come visit us sometimes? After Papa gets better and we fix our house?" Marcus knelt down to her level, smiling warmly. "Elena, I would be honored to visit your family, and I think Mrs. Chen would like to see how you're doing too. And you'll still be a palace guard, even after you left your post to help me?" Marcus glanced at Detective Rodriguez, who had been keeping him updated on Colonel Santos's communications. "It seems that when you do the right thing for the right reasons, good people understand and support you." "Yes, I'll still be a palace guard." Elena hugged him tightly, her small arms barely reaching around his armored shoulders. "Thank you for listening to me when I called for help. Thank you for keeping your promise." As the wagons continued toward the city, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed in a single day. He had started the morning as a routine palace guard following established protocols. Now he was part of a story that would probably be told and retold throughout the kingdom. The story of a royal guard who heard a child's quiet distress, call and chose compassion over protocol. The late afternoon, sun painted everything golden as they traveled, and Marcus realized that Elena had given him something as valuable as what he had given her. She had reminded him why his oath of service truly mattered, and what it meant to protect not just buildings and important people, but the hopes and dreams and families that made the kingdom worth protecting. Some calls for help were loud and obvious, impossible to ignore. But Elena had taught him that the most important calls were often the quietest ones, the whispered pleas of those who had almost given up hope, but still dared to ask for help. And sometimes, answering those quiet calls was the most important duty of all. 3 months later, Marcus stood at his familiar post by the palace gates, but everything felt different now. The morning sun created the same patterns of light and shadow. The same gardeners tended the same roses, and the same servants hurried along the same paths. But Marcus himself had changed in ways that went far deeper than his daily routine. His reputation throughout the kingdom had grown beyond anything he could have imagined. The story of the royal guard who abandoned his post to save a child had spread from village to village, growing slightly more dramatic with each telling. Some versions had him fighting off dozens of criminals single-handedly, while others claimed the king himself had personally commended his actions. The truth, as Marcus well knew, was both simpler and more complex than the legends suggested. Colonel Santos had indeed recommended him for commendation, and the royal family had expressed their approval of his actions. More importantly, the investigation that followed Elena's rescue had uncovered a criminal network that had been terrorizing rural families for months. Dozens of families had been saved because one little girl had been brave enough to ask for help. But the real changes in Marcus's life were quieter and more personal. Every Sunday he visited the Martinelli family at their rebuilt home near the mill. Giuseppe had recovered fully from his injuries, and the family had received compensation from the kingdom for their suffering and lost possessions. Elena had grown taller and more confident, but she still ran to hug Marcus every time he arrived, still called him her hero, still insisted he share their family dinner. This particular morning brought a special visitor to the palace gates. A young woman approached in the uniform of the city watch, Detective Rodriguez's newest recruit, someone who had specifically requested to work in family protection services. Captain Marcus, she called formally, though her eyes sparkled with familiar mischief. Marcus looked more closely and realized he was looking at Elena, though she was now 15 years old and considerably taller than the frightened 8-year-old who had first called to him for help. "Elena?" he said with amazement. "What are you doing here in that uniform?" She grinned, the same bright smile that had convinced him to abandon his post all those years ago. "Detective Rodriguez has been training me, Captain Marcus. I'm going to be a constable, specializing in helping children who are in trouble." Marcus felt pride swell in his chest, along with a touch of melancholy for the passage of time. "Your parents must be very proud, and perhaps a little worried about the dangers." "They are both," Elena admitted. "But they understand why this matters to me. You showed me that sometimes one person listening, one person caring, can change everything. I want to be that person for other children who need help." She reached into her uniform pocket and pulled out something familiar, the same stuffed rabbit she had clutched during her rescue, now carefully mended and preserved despite the years. "I still carry him sometimes when I'm investigating cases involving children," she said, her tone becoming more serious. "It helps them trust me, knowing that I understand what it feels like to be scared and alone." Marcus nodded with understanding. "Elena, you've grown into exactly the person I hoped you would become. Strong, brave, and dedicated to helping others." "I learned from the best teacher," she replied. "Captain Marcus, I have something important to tell you. Detective Rodriguez is retiring next month, and he's recommended me for promotion to take over his position in family services. But I wanted to ask you something first." She paused, suddenly looking younger and more uncertain. "Would you consider joining the City Watch as a senior advisor? We need someone with your experience and judgment to help train new recruits, especially in situations where protocol and humanity might conflict." The offer surprised Marcus completely. After 23 years of palace duty, he had assumed he would retire from the Royal Guard and spend his remaining years in quiet service. But Elena's proposal opened up possibilities he hadn't considered. "Elena, that's a significant career change. I would need to think carefully about such a decision." "Of course," she said quickly. "But Captain Marcus, think about all the good we could do together. Think about all the children like I was, who need someone to hear their quiet calls for help." As if summoned by their conversation, Colonel Santos approached from within the palace grounds. Now promoted to general, he had become even more distinguished with age. But his relationship with Marcus had evolved into something closer to friendship than simple military hierarchy. "Captain Marcus," General Santos said formally, then smiled. Or should I say soon-to-be former Captain Marcus? Marcus looked between Elena and his commanding officer with confusion. "Sir, I received an interesting communication from the City Watch this morning," General Santos explained. "It seems they're very interested in recruiting one of our most innovative officers for a new position in family protection services." Elena stepped forward eagerly. "General Santos, has Captain Marcus mentioned the offer?" "He has, young lady. and I've given it considerable thought." General Santos turned to Marcus with an expression that mixed official approval with personal affection. "Captain, you've served the royal family with honor for over 2 decades. But more importantly, you've shown that true service sometimes means thinking beyond traditional boundaries." "Sir, are you saying—" "I'm saying that the kingdom would be well served by having you train the next generation of protectors, people who understand that our oath is to serve all citizens, not just the powerful ones." General Santos smiled. "Your request for transfer to civilian service is approved, with the royal family's blessing and gratitude." Marcus felt as if the world was shifting beneath his feet, but in the most positive way possible. Everything that had started with Elena's quiet distress call was leading to new opportunities he could never have imagined. "Captain Marcus," Elena said softly, "will you do it? Will you help me make sure that no child's call for help goes unheard?" Marcus looked at this remarkable young woman, who had grown from a frightened little girl into a dedicated protector of others. He thought about all the children who might need someone to listen, someone to care, someone willing to break protocol when humanity demanded it. "Elena," he said with growing conviction, "I can't think of anything I'd rather do with the rest of my career." Elena's face lit up with joy, and she impulsively hugged him just as she had when she was 8 years old. But now the hug was between 2 professional protectors who understood that their work was about more than following rules. It was about preserving the bonds that held communities and families together. "There's one more thing," General Santos said with a mysterious smile. "The royal family has decided to establish a new award for exceptional service to the kingdom's most vulnerable citizens. The Elena Martinelli Medal for Protective Service. You'll be the first recipient, Captain Marcus." Elena gasped with surprise and delight. "They're naming an award after me?" "After your courage," General Santos corrected gently. "Your willingness to seek help when you needed it, and your dedication to helping others do the same." As the 3 of them stood together in the morning sunlight, Marcus realized that his greatest achievement hadn't been 23 years of flawless palace duty. It had been a single moment when he chose to listen to a child's quiet plea and decided that some things mattered more than protocol. The kingdom would always need guards at palace gates, following established procedures and maintaining security, but it also needed people willing to hear the whispered calls for help, willing to step outside their assigned roles when someone truly needed assistance. Elena had taught him that lesson years ago, and now they would teach it together to others. The best protection they had learned wasn't about walls and weapons and rigid protocols. It was about people caring enough to listen and brave enough to act when action was needed. The story that began with a quiet distress call had become something larger, a new understanding of what it truly meant to serve and protect. And that understanding would ripple outward, touching countless other lives in ways they might never fully know, but which would make the kingdom a safer and more compassionate place for all its children.